Disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not represent any employer or entity. The information shared is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or used in any legal capacity, including establishing standards of care. All efforts have been made to comply with HIPAA regulations. No guarantees are made regarding the accuracy of statements or opinions provided. Interaction with the podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please enjoy this podcast responsibly.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Pod Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dykes.
And Dr. Leland Jaffe.
Today, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Kevin Smith, the Dean of the Des Moines University College of Podiatric Medicine and Surgery.
Yeah, I think you guys are going to love this one. Dr. Smith is been Dean for a few years, but has been in an administrative role for over 18 plus years at DMU and really shares a wealth of knowledge of how he's ascended from an assistant professor to an associate dean and now to serve as the dean of the college. So I think we're really going to enjoy this one.
This is a great discussion. Enjoy. Today, we are joined by the Dean of the Des Moines University College of Podiatric Medicine and Surgery, Dr. Kevin Smith. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Smith.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So you are currently the dean, obviously, like I just mentioned, of Des Moines University. But your history with Des Moines kind of goes way back to obviously going to school there and then becoming faculty eventually. So how did you end up coming to Iowa originally?
Well, first of all, you didn't have to put emphasis on way back.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, so I ended up coming to Iowa. I ran track at University of Northern Iowa. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania. So I ended up coming out to Iowa. And then I met my future wife. So when I was finishing college, I was looking at podiatric medical schools. And, I looked at some on the East Coast. And then I looked at, it wasn't Des Moines University then. It was University of Osteopathic Medicine and Health Sciences.
So what year would that have been?
Des Moines University until 99.
Okay.
99, 2000. So came to Des Moines, then ended up graduating Des Moines. I did my residency in New Jersey and was in private practice in Clifton, New Jersey. And I enjoyed teaching so much when I was a resident. I think, we lose sight at how much residents teach students.
Yeah.
They do interact with attendings, but when the attendings are done with surgery and they head back, they're pretty much spending the entire day, evenings, sometimes weekends with the residents. So we would review fracture classifications and all antibiotics and everything. So I really, really enjoyed that and thought I might want to get into teaching. And, life is kind of crazy where things just happen to work out. So one day I'm sitting in the office, Journal of Foot and Ankle Surgery comes out. I'm leafing through it and boom, there's a faculty position.
Was this when you were in New Jersey?
Yeah. So when I was in New Jersey. So faculty position comes out. And during my residency, my wife and I came back to visit some friends and we really missed Iowa. The cost of living is pretty cheap and, safety and all those things. But if we were going to move back to Iowa, we really only wanted to be in Des Moines. So literally the next week, there's an advertisement for a faculty position in Des Moines. So went ahead, talked to my wife, applied for it, and then started at Des Moines University in 1998 and was an assistant professor and then became assistant dean for clinical affairs in 2003 and then became an associate professor and was in the clinical affairs office for 18 years.
Sure.
And then became the dean in 2021.
Yeah. So one thing that I have in common, I think too, is I was in practice for about 4.5 years before I went into academia as well too. So how many years were you in practice before you made that transition to an academic role?
Really just 1 year.
1 year.
1 year in practice, but then when I came here, we have practice here. So continued. I'm still in practice to this day.
Right.
So I think that which is might be unique. I don't know how other deans are, but I still see patients. I'm still in clinic, which is great because I can kind of get to learn our students, know our students on a little deeper level, but also kind of get an idea of how our curriculum's doing.
So for those who don't know, Dr. Smith is my wife's boss. So when she heard we were having you on, all she said was, "Don't get me fired." And I said, "I promise nothing." So that's our goal today, is to not get her fired. So
yeah, she told me the same thing.
Just forget everything he says. I don't associate with him.
So when along your journey did you pursue your PhD?
So I have to go back and remember the dates. At first, I got my master's in education from Drake University, and we all think we can teach, right? We all think we're content experts, and we see that when we bring in guest lecturers, right? We bring in these world-renowned speakers and guest lecturers, and they really are top of the field. But teaching is a whole different animal, and learning how to facilitate a classroom and keep the attention of younger learners. It's a lot different when you're a surgeon, you go to a conference and you're there with a lot of people who are also content experts. So I wanted to say, how could I become a better teacher? So I went and got my master's in education from Drake University. And then I think right after that, I wanted to get into academic administration. So then I started my PhD at the University of Nebraska. So I think I started at 2007 and then got busy with travel sports and all that other stuff. So, my plan was to just blow right through it and finish it in like 3 years. And actually graduated in 2014. So it took me 7. There was about a 2 to 3 year break there where my wife was like, "Listen, we're super busy. I need you to pause for a little bit."
Sure.
So all in all, it took me about 7 years. I finished the coursework in about 4 to 5, even with like a 3 year break, but then worked on my dissertation, and that took a little while.
So going back to get your master's and your PhD, obviously when that happened, I think if I'm doing the math correctly, you said that was 14 years before you came dean. So you had some inclination that you wanted to stay in academia. At what point did you realize that you might want to be dean someday? Did you think that from the beginning, or did that just kind of happen as time went on?
It kind of happened as time went on. I actually had probably different aspirations. I thought, being a dean would be great, but I had aspirations of being a provost or being a university president at some time.
Sure.
So that's why I went and got my PhD in higher ed administration.
Sure. So what did you learn? Because, I think that's an interesting point is us as physicians, we're taught how to be physicians. We aren't taught how to be professors or teachers, or how to write a good test question, or all the stuff that comes along with that. So I would imagine that the master's program and subsequently the PhD kind of helped formulate that process for you and make it a little clearer, so that then you can kind of dispense some of that information to the faculty. Do you find that to be the case? Did it help you become a better, professor? Because it's not built into our training.
No, it certainly helped. And I think, Leland being in school can certainly attest to this. We come in as practitioners and then we hear all these terms about lecture objectives and then mapping our curriculum, right? Making sure that we identify 3 to 5 lecture objectives for a lecture, and then we put emphasis on those things. And then our test questions should be mapped to a specific objective in the curriculum. So a lot of that, but then when you get down to the classroom and how you facilitate a classroom, understanding that students have different learning styles. And although our students are adults, I think sometimes there's definitely a difference in adult learning, and you also have young adults, and then you have older adults, and typically when we go to conferences, we're dealing with older adults, and what are their learning styles, and understanding that some people are visual learners, some people are auditory, and trying to put things in your lecture that meet everyone's needs, and as simple things as accessibility. Do you have, you may have students that have red-green color blindness. I mean, do you have, what kind of font colors do you have? What kind of backgrounds do you have? I think we put together slides and we never stop to think about stuff like that.
Right.
The biggest thing I see is people have way too much stuff on their slides. They think that they have to convey every single point. It's not a textbook on a PowerPoint slide.
Right.
And if you know the material, then you can kind of deal with, bullet points and embedded videos, and, attention spans are different, right? Our attention spans are probably different than different generations, so stopping after 7 minutes, after 10 minutes, maybe doing an activity. So those are the things that we really focused on, how to hold the attention of students. And then when I got into my PhD, it was more administration. It was more, I took a class on disaster management, where we were all assigned titles. You're a president, you're a provost, you're a CFO, and a tornado just tore through half your campus. Go.
Right.
Which almost just happened, by the way.
Yeah, which almost just happened.
I was watching the news, and there was a tornado rolling through the new DMU campus on the local
Yeah, it was
news.
a little south.
And I was like, oh, that's a lot of glass.
So, we had a course on, it was, disaster management. And then we had a course on speaking to media.
Okay.
And courses on strategic planning and, almost rank promotion and tenure process of professors and things like that. So that was where a lot of the courses were in my PhD.
Yeah. And I can definitely attest to that. When I came to the college in 2015, so I've been here almost 10 years now, I remember, and I came straight from practice. So I worked with a residency in St. Louis. So the SSM DePaul program, I had the residents with me, but it was more in a surgical suite. I didn't create any curriculum, and I didn't do anything outside of just the operating room and working with the residents in the OR. So I remember coming to the college and being on a committee where they're all of a sudden talking about, formative and summative assessments. And I'm like, oh boy, I better Google what those are. But there is a steep learning curve. And I think a lot of faculty, definitely would benefit from those types of programs to really learn how to teach. And what I've noticed over the last 10 years too, is the learning style of our students has changed quite exponentially over the last 10 years. And I don't know if that was accelerated from the pandemic. A lot of the students come into graduate programs from learning remotely in college, but it seems to be, evolving pretty quickly right now.
Yeah, I think that plus just the social media and how students focus. Everything in their life is social media. It's small snippets, and and I think it started with Vine, and then it continued with TikTok and everything else. It's just short bursts of information. And sitting through a 50-minute lecture with 140 slides, I mean, it's not fun for us when we go to a conference. It's certainly torture to them.
Sure. Yeah, I was just at the Midwest Podiatry Conference a couple of weeks ago in Chicago, and I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, just basically brainstorming, when will we get away from this format of PowerPoint is the only way to do these CME type events, because it can be rough sitting in a auditorium for 8 hours, PowerPoint after PowerPoint.
Well, I think organizations have started, to catch on, especially the professional colleges, because if you remember, if you went to some of these conferences years ago, they were much longer programs.
Sure.
And now they're doing these mini lectures, right? These little 15, 20-minute quick hit mini lectures, and then panel discussion. I remember I don't want to mention the name on here, but there was a institute that was out of the South that you'd go to their and literally it was all morning, all afternoon, and these presentations were hour and 20 minutes long. And now they've pretty much gone to 15, 20 minutes tops.
Sure.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I think that's one, following research of how people process information, but I also think they're starting to get the message that that old way just isn't successful. And I think introducing the round tables and allowing people to ask questions, because, you know, in the traditional format, you would just ask, anybody have any questions? And people would be like, no, you know, I'm tired. They're they're putting lunch boxes out.
Right.
No,
moving on.
No questions. But now they kind of have those round tables. And if nobody asks a question, then they'll go ahead and, you know, kind of ask each other questions.
Yeah.
But you've been to those there's always that one person that's going to always step up to the microphone.
Sure.
And ask a question.
Yeah. The lectures are annoying when they are given a lecture on triple arthrodesis and it starts in 1923. Ryerson described the trip. You're like, we all know this. Just skip all of this stuff. We all went through school. We know all that. First of all, it's not, you know, relatable to what we're doing on a daily basis. I think we're moving away from that. I think we're getting to the point where, you know, like you said, the attention spans are lower, but it's in the benefit of the listeners when you're getting the root of the information. Okay, let me get 15 minutes, because they're not going to walk away an hour and 20 and remember an hour and 19 minutes of that. They're going to remember 3 things. So why spend an hour 20 teaching them 3 things when you could spend 15 minutes teaching them 3 things, and they're going to walk away with the same 3 things in their mind. So I think we're getting better at that.
And that would be a great exercise, you know, and I've never seen that at a conference, to just say, get out a piece of paper and write down the 3 biggest things you've learned from this presentation. But, you know, you mentioned a good point. I think that's why true content experts struggle lecturing to students, because they forget their audience.
Yeah. We did one of the workshops I was able to coordinate recently was all about formative assessments. And one of the ones I think I'm going to implement more, sort of the opposite of what you're describing, like what did you learn from this lecture, but what is I think it's called the muddiest point, right? What don't you get, right? And you can have them basically live input the muddiest point on the PowerPoint slide, and then you can address these points with the audience and things like that. I think make it interactive and really kind of hone in on what the audience needs.
Yep.
And I think
content experts forget what they didn't know. Like you think, like you two right here, sitting here, you guys were involved in residency training, did good residency programs. Like, you think you were always this smart. And then you go back to lecture to students and you're like, why don't they know this stuff?
Right.
And I'm like, trust me, I've been doing this long enough. You didn't know it either.
Right.
You know, when you were a second year, or when you were a third year.
Yeah,
so sometimes we'll see those content experts will come in and just start ripping into, you know, prepping joints, locking plates, all this other stuff. And students are like, wait a minute, I'm lost.
Yeah. Right.
Can you go really, really back to the and sometimes content experts struggle with that. We get so many alumni, and I'm sure, Leland, you do too, that always say, hey, I'd love to come back and teach at the school. I'd love to come back and lecture for you guys. And, you know, I think sometimes they might get upset when we don't take them up on that, but that's not where second year students are at. And we don't need you coming back and giving a lecture that you would have given in a national conference to students. Because it's all going to be muddy to them.
Yeah. I think we do draw a distinction there between national conferences where the audience has all that base knowledge. We don't need to rehash that. Let's touch on the interesting points, versus a lecture in school where they don't have any of that base foundation. So we do need to spend an hour talking about a hammer toe. We do need to spend an hour talking about a triple arthrodesis and where it came from and how we used to do it and why it failed. So there is a distinction there. So I don't know, you talked about learning styles with the students. So at DMU, obviously, and I'm sure Shoal, and I'm sure lots of the schools all together have recorded lectures. And by nature of recording lectures, that allows the students to choose whether they attend lectures, which can be a good thing for the student. But I think in my experience dealing with students is that maybe it was driven from COVID, but the more disconnected students have become after COVID, the less socially interactive they are. They're really struggling to hold conversations, make eye contact, meet strangers, introduce themselves. And I think you can maybe tie a small link in there to going to class, meeting your classmates, showing up, and that initial social thing, because students, I think, view it as, well, that's not the best use of my time. And I completely understand that. I want to listen to it on double speed so I can do X, Y, and Z. And I completely get that. But I think one thing that they're missing is that social interaction with their classmates, who they may come to rely on someday as a referral source. They work in the same town. They didn't work in that town, but then their friend from school is hiring, and you show up and you're like, hey, and you're like, who are you? I never met you. So what are your thoughts on students attending lecture versus being remote, or is it just kind of up to the students how they want to tackle that?
I think it's up to the student. I think that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. I mean, we've got some students that maybe don't come to class and they watch it virtually. But they're still very outgoing and they're involved in a lot of social activities and clubs and things like that. I think it's nice to have that option because sometimes life happens, right? And maybe you're sick that week and you really can't come to campus or something like that, but you're not going to fall behind. But I think there's techniques that in this new virtual world with distance education, our faculty just went through a 7-lecture faculty development series on how to engage students in distance education.
That's
and
tough.
Almost everybody's doing distance education, whether they think they aren't. I mean,
right.
The definition we all think of with distance education is like Phoenix University or University of Phoenix and stuff like that. Yeah. Well, the true definition is anytime you have students that are separated by time or space, that's distance education. So if I give a lecture in a lecture hall and I have a class of 60 and 55 of them are there and 5 of them are watching it on Zoom, even if it's live, that's still distance education because I have some students that are separated in that instance by space, even though they're watching it synchronously with everybody else. And there's things that you can do to engage students, such as breakout rooms and having some discussion questions and poll everywhere questions and stuff like that to increase engagement. They're not going to necessarily get that social aspect that happens, when you go to get coffee in between classes and you're just talking about the content and, you lose the ability to go talk to the lecturer and ask them questions. But then I think that's where office hours, open office hours help, but those co-curricular activities where we have a chance to get students together, even labs, anatomy labs, taping labs, internal fixation labs, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And those are fun things students like to go to.
Yeah. So I see it now on this side of it because my wife is, up at the podium lecturing and, I see her come home and say, oh, there were 3 people there. You're like, well, that sucks. Sorry. You put a lot of effort into that lecture and 3 people showed up. Doesn't mean 3 people saw it. It just means, it is a two-way street there. And so I think students kind of lose that, aspect of it. And there's a little bit of detachment. And so, I think it is important to keep in mind that, students, as they progress to residency, you can't go to residency virtually. You can't be a physician virtually. So yes, there may be some component where it benefits you now, but you need to learn those life skills and how to interact with your colleagues, because the very next step, if you go from never taking a lecture right into 3rd-year clinic, I think that's jumping in the deep end. I think that's a little bit, who are these people? I don't know them, right? So I can definitely see both sides of it, but it's an interesting to think about because I think, like you said, the model of teaching and education is constantly changing based on the students' desires, the students' attention spans. And so trying to adapt to that to keep them engaged, I think can be difficult. But I think that's a good point, that casting labs and the things where they're hands-on, that they need to be there. I think that's obviously beneficial because they're going to need to know those things. But I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. Leland, what's your
Yeah.
experience at the school with that?
Yeah. I mean, I selfishly want them in class, but definitely acknowledge that there are a lot of different learning styles, and some students need more time than others to process information, and sometimes they can do that better remotely than live.
Sure.
I think some classes are easier to understand and follow remotely than in person. I mean, some of the really heavy clinical courses, and I teach a lot of those as well. Sometimes I might present some of my own patients or show different images or clinical photographs that I can't disseminate to the entire class via PowerPoint. So you might miss out on those things if you're not there.
Sure.
So those are, but I think if you want students to come to class, I think a lot of that is incumbent upon the faculty to really make it worthwhile to come to class, right?
Yep.
And really present it in a way where it's worth their time, and you're not just reading your PowerPoint slides and really just going through the process where they can just be much more efficient at home. So really bringing in different styles like flipping the classroom, doing interactive, active learning methods and things like that can really, I think, make it much more of a worthwhile experience. But yeah, I mean, if you're just making it not engaging and just passively having them sit there for an hour, I don't blame them if they just don't show up and really just go through that process at home much more efficiently.
And that's a really good point, because there's the one side where you have faculty that are always like, well, it's the professional thing to do. You're a professional student. You're going to be a resident. You should want to go to class. You should do this. But then you kind of flip that and say, well, what are the faculty doing?
Mm-hmm.
And how are the faculty teaching to create a situation where a student says, I have to get to that lecture because it's so awesome. It's so entertaining.
Right.
So we kind of lose that. And I go back to undergrad, man, we had a physics professor. That physics professor, super hard. I mean, you didn't go to his class because it was easy, but he was doing 3 to 4 different experiments every single class.
Mm-hmm.
And it was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I think, what are we doing? I think we have to look internally and say, are we doing everything we can do to facilitate a classroom, incorporate active learning so students want to be there?
Yeah. Was the physics kinematics motion?
And it was physics 1. And we were just talking about this the other day, me and some other people that went to college with me. And you couldn't do it today, but one day he walked into class with a rifle.
Okay.
Like you can't do that today, right? I mean,
we're
talking like
now. Yeah.
So he walked into class with a rifle. He had a block suspended from the ceiling, a known weight. We knew the mass of the bullet, and we knew the muzzle velocity.
Okay.
And he literally set it up on a tripod and he shot the rifle at the block. And then you measured how much energy it would take for that block to move.
That's cool.
But just firing this, it was like a 22 long rifle. It wasn't anything bigger than that. But you couldn't do that today. But that was like, how you weren't going to miss that.
No.
Yeah. And it was just awesome. And, I look like now you go on TikTok and there's a couple physics professors on TikTok that are doing some really, really cool things. And students love watching that stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's occurring in a classroom. It's being put on TikTok and students are watching it because it's cool and interesting.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think that's what you have to bring to your classroom. So
absolutely.
Yeah, easier said than done.
It is. And there's constraints, right? There's time constraints. We have a lot of content experts, but I think universities have help. They all have development offices mm-hmm. that you can go to and say, make me a better teacher, help me. They'll come in and assess you in the classroom and give you ideas and suggestions and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's what's probably missing a little bit.
Yeah.
Think about this. We also have financial resources. We have boards. We have to cover a certain amount of material that's in the curricular guide so they can do well on boards.
Right.
But I think a funny project would be make a TikTok explaining the etiology of bunions. Yeah. And put them in groups. And you might find that they work really, really hard on that, and they
Mhm.
come out of that understanding something. But do you do that outside of class time? Do you do it? Do you devote class time to that? I mean, so there's a lot of things that we have to think about.
Right.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
that stuff's not going away. That's where a lot of our students live, in that space. So we might as well embrace it and use it to our advantage.
Yeah,
Another,
I
another thing that I always look at too is student evaluations. And a lot of times they'll tell you how to make class more interactive and make it better. So really just taking that feedback and trying to continue to evolve and, modify the way that you teach, I think those evaluations can be real valuable also.
They'll tell you a lot of other stuff in those
Oh,
evaluations.
100%. 100%.
Sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt.
You got to have thick skin for
Sometimes
sure.
it can be pretty hurtful, especially for
Absolutely.
new faculty members.
These
Absolutely.
aren't anonymous like you think they are. They're anonymous to a point. We still not completely blind, so have a little professionalism. So switching gears a little bit. So you became dean now almost 3 years ago. And that was kind of right in the midst of COVID, or, winding into the middle / down of COVID. So how did you have to adapt through that time frame? We all kind of went through it. We all experienced it in our own way, but obviously all of a sudden they're saying, okay, you can't get together. Well, obviously for the students who stay home, they're like, what's the difference? What are you talking about? What's new? But how did you have to kind of overcome some of those challenges as dean going through the period of COVID?
We were back in person by the time I became dean.
Okay.
But I was dean for clinical affairs during March 2020, and I will tell you that we really only shut down for about 3 days because the amount of technology we have at our university, and we had been using a lot of that technology prior to COVID hitting. So we were kind of starting that process of building a new campus.
Mm-hmm.
We were already using Zoom for meetings, faculty meetings and things like that. And in preparation for having a clinic at one campus site, and then having our main campus at another site. So we were going to have clinical faculty down here. At another location, we might have basic science faculty. How are we going to have university faculty meetings? So we had started kind of doing all that before COVID ever hit. So basically, COVID hit. The previous dean, Dr. Yoho, and I met, and we kind of mapped out what we were going to do over 3 days and then implemented it. So we had very, very minimal impact from COVID, but I've heard stories from other institutions where faculty had to go out and purchase their own Zoom accounts.
Oh, wow.
Because the university didn't have that, or the university was trying to figure that out. We were already recording lectures. We were already using Zoom. So it wasn't a big deal. Clinical rotations, we had to move some clinical rotations because I think if you think back to early COVID, it didn't hit the entire country at the same time. There were hot spots that were shut down, but there were still institutions that were doing clerkships and clinical rotations, and as long as you were wearing PPE and stuff like that. So, if we had a student that was scheduled to go to a hot zone, I know, like, say Philadelphia was a hot zone for a while, New York City, we'd have to pull them out and send them to another area because it hit different parts of the country at different times. So we had minimal impact. And by the time I became dean, June 21, we were back full bore. Our anatomy department had already gone to practicals where they took pictures of structures, and those were on the exams, and they were high quality photos. The one reason they went to that is because if you've ever been in a practical, it's great if you're the one that sees the structure first, but there's always a sign, don't touch.
Exactly.
Well, then like 30 people through, somebody's touching the pin moves, and now it's not in the right area. Yeah. So that kind of eliminated that. And even fall of 20, with PPE, we did in-person anatomy labs. We went with smaller groups, more lab sessions. So it really we kind of came through that pretty unscathed. So
yeah, that's nice. It sounds like a lot of people too have kind of the silver lining of the pandemic is we learned how to do things more efficiently. So there are some positives that perhaps a lot of people did take away from that. Yeah, one thing that I'm noticing infiltrating into higher education is artificial intelligence. How do you foresee that playing a role in education or patient care?
Well, I think the biggest aspect, is from a patient care aspect, we're starting to already see it. I mean, my daughter's a junior in college. She's looking for scribe jobs. There's some clinics in the area that have already gotten rid of scribes because they've gone to AI transcription.
Yeah.
So that's one. I think we're going to obviously see it. There was that study that looked at lung cancer and CT scans. I think it was in the Northeast. I don't know if it was Harvard, but they found out that AI could look at previous CTs of lung cancer patients.
Sure.
And then they could look at other CT scans and diagnose lung cancer. So I think that we're going to see that used for probably the majority of cancer diagnosis, where if you have a pathologist looking at a slide, they might miss it. I think they might have AI that has the ability to upload hundreds and hundreds of thousands of specimen slides, and then be able to look at a slide and make a diagnosis. It might replace pathology in a sense, right? Or downsize pathology department. So I see that. I think from a student perspective, we're probably not going to deal with it in podiatric medical education as much as probably undergrad. Our students don't write a lot of papers.
Yeah.
Right now they're just having AI write papers and stuff like that. But we have AI policies that the university has implemented for faculty and students. I think you've got to be careful that if you're going to use it in, say, admissions research and you're going to upload a bunch of transcripts, that's open to the public now. So all that stuff has to be de-identified. So there's policies regarding that. And people are now using AI to predict which students are going to be successful in my program, as opposed to doing, the old way, right? A linear regression or something like that. So, we're going to see it. In both realms. So
I remember I was at the diabetic limb salvage conference. This was pre-pandemic, so 5-6 years ago. And I remember the CEO of MedStar talking about AI, way before ChatGPT was readily available. And he was mentioning about computer reading chest x-rays way better than a human, because they can scan hundreds of thousands of images through and really detect such subtle differences that the human eye might not be able to see. So that'll be interesting.
Well, we know it's good at taking USMLE.
Okay.
Because ChatGPT passed the USMLE.
Oh wow.
They did that where they uploaded a bunch of stuff and then
that's wild.
Gave ChatGPT the exam and passed it.
Wow. I wonder if AI could be used on the incoming student front to evaluate the most likely candidates to succeed. I guess that gets a slippery slope there in terms of taking out the human interaction of predictive outcomes there. But I guess you could then remove the implicit human bias of seeing a person, interacting with them, and just using MCAT scores and GPAs from whatever institutions, and just using historical data of, well, this person at this school at this GPA graduated number one in their class at this place, and not even podiatry, but in undergrad or law school or MD-DO school. I wonder if that is going to be implemented at some point, because there is a lot of human, I don't want to say bias, but like humans are involved a lot, and whether they realize it or not, when they choose applicants or choose people to come to their school, maybe it's the best applicant, maybe it isn't. Maybe AI would come up with something different. I'm just thinking on the fly of how AI could be involved in our world, but it's not too crazy to think about.
Well, I did my dissertation on exactly what you just said. But
really?
Okay. I did it.
That's why I said it. Because I read it. And I knew it. Yeah. That's why I said that.
Man, you're a great interviewer.
Yeah. I do my research.
Just lead the way. And the one crazy thing is despite all the metrics we have, MCAT, science, GPA, we've included a rating for institutional selectivity. does a 3.5 at one undergrad mean the same as a 3.5 at another?
Right.
And we ranked schools by institutional selectivity from an undergraduate perspective. And all the hard data we have only explains about 33% of the equation of who's going to be successful and who's not going to be successful. And even if you look at allopathic studies, some of the highest predictors get as high as 40%.
Mm-hmm.
There's not any models, and that's where the social aspects come in, right?
Right.
Do we have students are they resilient? How well do they deal with failure?
Mm-hmm.
How's their time management? Things surrounding persistence. Some people just have grit and they're going to do whatever it takes. And one of the things I've learned now doing this for 26 years is everybody that is admitted is capable, and rarely do we see unsuccessful students not be able to do it because of academic reasons. It's personal issues that have an impact on their academics.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So that's the kind of, their parents get sick or grandparents get sick or something like that, or themselves, they have an issue. Mm-hmm. So that's the hard part, is kind of that human piece.
Yeah. A lot of non-measurable things.
So you became dean back in 2021 and beat out who I would say are two of the well-known people in our profession. So what do you think made you stand out or become the dean selection over them?
Well, first of all, they were excellent candidates. I just happened to be fortunate, but I think having my PhD and having a background in academia with strategic planning, I think the biggest thing, accreditation. I don't think people really understand accreditation,
right.
And I've been on accreditation teams for residency, for other colleges, been through 4 of them here.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously when you're a clinical dean, you work very closely with the dean in writing self-studies and CPME reporting to our accreditor. And that's a lot of that stuff.
So that's what I was going to say.
That.
So explain to the people listening what that means. What is that? I know what it means because I had Ashley kind of tell me what it means, but to the people who aren't in academia, what does that mean? What is the accreditation process? It's a huge process. What does that mean?
Well, I'll try to make this as simple as I can, something complicated, simple, but the Council on Podiatric Medical Education accredits pretty much everything related to education. They accredit residencies, they accredit colleges, fellowships, even which boards are recognized. And they even accredit our continuing education. So when one of our professional colleges puts on an event, they have to go to CPME and meet certain guidelines to get accredited. Well, there's a book for residencies and there's accreditation guidelines that you have to follow. And so for colleges, there's an accreditation guide and multiple standards. And within those standards, you have to demonstrate that you're able to do X, Y, and Z. And so that's the first part. I mean, there's annual reporting that we have to do. There's strategic planning that we have to do. And one of the standards is regarding strategic planning. And not only do you just have a strategic plan, but does it establish goals and benchmarks? And are you evaluating how you've met those benchmarks? And you'd be shocked at how many academic institutions, and not just in podiatric medicine, struggle with strategic planning process. They'll have a great strategic plan, but they have no idea how to measure whether or not their plan or the goals in their plan are successful.
Right.
Sure.
So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think that if you're coming in from the outside of an academic institution, that can be a really, really difficult thing for a lot of people.
So it's basically holding the institutions, in our case, DMU, CPMS, College of Podiatric Medicine and Surgery, accountable. They're doing what they say they're going to do. We're going to teach this course. We're going to meet these learning objectives. We're going to have this many faculty. We're going to have this many, educational hours. And here's our facilities and our anatomy lab and our campus. And we have everything basically holding them accountable, which is great. You want all of the institutions, podiatric or otherwise, being held accountable, especially there's many dollars at stake. You don't want. There were a couple of I don't want to use the wrong name. There was one or two that became essentially fraudulent and came to find out they weren't doing what they said they were doing. They were keeping the tuition dollars. So, anyways, this process is holding the institutions accountable, but it's a huge process to go through that. Yeah. So, I know that got a little bit complicated. So. This past year, Des Moines University opened their new campus, same street down the road a few miles, moved from Des Moines to West Des Moines. So now it should be called West Des Moines University, but that's a discussion for another day. So talk through that process, because that's a big undertaking to build a new campus, design, because one thing that we can add into this conversation is the learning styles of the students. So just one example is library usage. On the old campus, there was a huge library full of many books. And on the new campus, there is a library, but it's much smaller because the way that students are learning is much different. So talk us through that process of building a new campus and how you came to formulate your plan for what that might look like into the future for student learning abilities.
I think that when we started... So we started construction of the new campus right in the middle of COVID. I think, they broke ground spring of 2020, kind of maybe that April, May. So we had kind of started to already do the planning before COVID. And we looked at our learning spaces, and we wanted collaborative learning spaces where, we could have traditional lecture format, but we could quickly shift tables around for small group discussion. The technology in the lecture halls or the learning spaces is unbelievable. We have what's called one-touch Zoom. So sometimes if you've ever jumped on a Zoom, it can be, you've got codes and meeting invites and all these processes. Well, in the lecture halls, we just touch on the lecture name, and then we hit share, and it's already on Zoom. So we have one-touch Zoom. We've got collaborative learning spaces. You mentioned the library. I think that is a lesson that people learned more during COVID. But library usage at all universities across the country was starting to decrease even before COVID. And one of the things that we learned during COVID, when all of these campuses and libraries were shut down, is students were still able to access materials because of online text, online journals.
Right.
So really, libraries during COVID, pre-COVID, after COVID, were essentially just big study rooms. They have large, massive footprints on universities. If you think back to your undergrad, we see these large undergrads at 5-6-story libraries.
Sure.
Yeah.
These massive spaces. And students just aren't going in there and searching in the stacks for books and photocopying pages or articles out of books. All that stuff is available online now. Yeah. If I gave any one of you a topic and gave you a half an hour, you could find 30 electronic PDF articles on that topic.
Right. And I wouldn't go to the library.
Never have to leave your house.
Exactly. I wouldn't even think of going to the library. I'd pop up my computer and start Googling.
Yeah.
So what we tried to do is create study space. So essentially, our entire campus is a library. Lecture halls are completely open. If lecture halls aren't being used, students can go in there and study. At night, the entire campus, every lecture hall is a study space. And then we have actual rooms that are designated true quiet spaces. So some of those lecture halls are actually treated as a quiet library space, where some of them are a little bit more informal. You can make a little bit more noise. You can do some of those things. So the entire campus is a library. So that's something we've re-envisioned. But we were talking about accreditation. So prior to us moving our campus, I had to submit a request to our accreditor for a change in location. You can't just move to a campus without telling your accreditor.
Right.
You have to submit a ton of documents, floor plans, seating charts, all that other stuff to make sure you have the adequate resources. They approve it, but they're actually coming out. CPME is sending a team out tomorrow morning to see our new campus. So it's kind of a focus visit to make sure that it's adequate to educate students.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to mention when you're talking about the library, it made me think of the fact that my jokes with our students are getting less and less funny. The distance between us. So if I were to make like a Dewey Decimal System joke, I don't think they'd really get it.
No.
Yeah.
Well, we had card catalogs, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like you would search through a card catalog, and when you went to undergrad, you took a course in library services.
Exactly.
Taught you how to search. And then that progressed. I think Jeff's probably young enough where he didn't have to do this. They actually searched for stuff on a computer. We actually had the card catalog. Yeah. And now you just do it on your laptop. So when we moved to the new campus, we massively expanded our online offerings. The number of services that we pay for, a lot more electronic journals, a lot more electronic textbooks. So now, textbook sales have kind of plummeted because you can pay and then you can just, get McGlamory online.
Yeah.
So pretty much when you go to buy a book, they almost have online versions of that. So now we see a lot of undergraduate campuses redistributing their library space. I think Vanderbilt, they had like a 5-story library. So now it's down to 2 floors and the other 3 floors are offices because they're paying for all these spaces and they're heating them and they're paying for electricity and nobody's really using them anymore.
So interesting.
So what has surprised you about being dean? It may be nothing because you worked at the school for quite a few years and you kind of worked so closely with Dr. Yoho, but what surprised you the most when you actually took over and became dean?
There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that I never knew as a faculty member.
Sure.
There's just a lot of things you have to deal with. There's issues with students, there's maybe issues with alumni, so sometimes you'll get calls from alumni that aren't happy about something, or residency directors, or, sometimes, rarely, but you could have a student on a rotation, and there's just all kinds of other things that you have to deal with that I never knew the previous dean was dealing with.
Yeah.
So we still talk quite a lot. We just got a great accreditation report. So I texted Dr. Yoho last week. We still go out and golf and stuff. So, I'm like, man, I never knew you were dealing with this. It's like, nobody does.
New level.
There's just a lot of stuff.
There is a lot of stuff going on.
Stuff
there.
You can talk about, stuff you can't talk about. But it's definitely interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you ran track back at UNI. Do you think you could still beat me in a foot race?
I don't know. I guarantee I could beat you in a pole vault.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
If you want to see me spear myself in the chest, well, let's give that a go. But
wow, that's a tough sport.
The upper arm strength, yeah, that's impressive.
So yeah, I did decathlon.
Wow.
And you say wow, but I'm pretty much, I wasn't good at any 10 events. I was average at 10.
Okay,
well, that's
the difference.
Most.
Is I think it's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none.
Right.
So what does that include? That's like sprinting, javelin, shot put, stuff like that.
Hurdles. Okay. 1,500 meters, pole vault, high jump, long jump, 400. Jeez. So kind of the running events are the 100 meters, 400 meters, 1,500, and then you have 110 hurdles, long jump, high jump, pole vault, javelin, shot put.
Jeez.
Over
I can't do
2
any
days.
of those things. I played tennis. So, that's it.
And the last event is the absolute worst event.
What is it? The
1,500. The last event is the absolute worst event. It's the 1,500 meters.
Oof.
Save the best for last.
Is this all done in one day?
2 days.
2 days.
2 days. Oh.
Yep. So 5 events each day.
That's rough.
Yeah.
You got to be sore. training,
I was-
all that.
I-
How
I
do you
was a
train
lot
for all
younger
those
then.
things? You don't have enough
Yeah,
time
I was
to
a
train
lot younger
for them
then.
all. Well, yeah.
So I get sore getting out of bed now.
Yeah, I'm getting that. I'm getting that way too.
Things are getting a little more
Getting that.
creaky.
Yeah.
Joints are
Make more
making more
noise when I
than they used
stand
to.
up. Yeah, when I stand up off the couch, there's an audible noise that comes out. Ugh, just to stand up. Leland, anything else you want to add?
No. I think it's great to hear your insight, and I moved into an administrative role a couple years ago as well, so I can definitely appreciate the being involved in meetings and involved with information that I wasn't involved with when I wasn't wearing that hat. So, it's a lot to juggle. I definitely have a ton of respect for, you as a dean level, just how many things you have to balance. And, it's a tough job. So I definitely really respect what you do.
Yeah, thank you. But you have to be even keel. You can't get too emotional about any one thing. But we call them, there's some days you come to work and it feels like all you're doing is putting out fires.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah,
But you have those days in practice, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
You just have a day where, your nurse comes to you and you're just like, every time they come to you, someone's got pain, someone's got a fever, someone just went into the hospital.
Yeah.
And you're just like, can anything go right?
Yeah. I can definitely appreciate that. I mean, my days tend to be very polarizing like that in clinic, where it's smooth as silk or just everyone's getting sent to the ED because they're draining pus,
Well, administration is kind of the same way, right?
Yeah.
You
Yep.
have those days, and then you have days where you're like, it seems like the world is crashing down.
Mhm.
So
I tell my staff that if they bring me some negative news, they also have to bring me something positive. I don't care what it is. Say, give me the negative news, but the sun is shining, or it's 70 degrees today. I can't
Balance it
handle
out.
negative. You got to balance it out. You bring me a negative, that's fine. I can handle it. You got to bring me something
I
positive.
like that policy. I might steal that one.
Yeah.
that is a good one.
Yeah, we're going to keep this upbeat as much as possible. So, all right. Thank you for joining us on Pod Patrol. We really appreciate your time and joining us on this and kind of giving people an insight into what it's like behind the curtain. I guess you are the Wizard of Oz. You're the man behind the curtain, pulling all the strings and making everything run. So we appreciate
Certainly not.
Yeah, we appreciate you joining us on the episode today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys thank you for having me. Thank you for all you guys do on social media to kind of bring awareness to our profession. I think that's huge. I think we, in podiatric medicine, sometimes we're our worst enemy.
Mhm.
We really don't do a very good job of telling the world who we are and what we do.
Yeah.
So, kudos to you guys for doing that, because I think it's certainly getting noticed.
Yeah. Thanks.
So,
Yeah.
a lot of credit to you guys.
I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful profession, and I think, just getting the word out is hopefully will resonate with a lot of individuals, especially people in undergrad and people in that pipeline for pre-med, that really just to be aware that this field exists and really the opportunities that it can present for them.
Yep. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Pod Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dykes.
Dr. Leland Jaffe.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.